But I hope that those aims that we'll come back to again and again are broad ranging, covering everything from sustainable solutions to reducing food waste, that access to emergency food provision, and then really importantly, that community resilience to promote social inclusion, cohesion and connection through food.
An absolute delight to be with you at this formal launch of Feeding Gloucestershire. My name is Andrew Forsey. I'm the National Director of Feeding Britain, and the only place it would be fair for me to start is really by thanking Debs, Lizzie, and the whole of the Feeding Gloucestershire steering group for their intensive work over recent months, through which they have learned inside out and off by heart the needs and circumstances of the communities that we seek to serve as a Feeding Gloucestershire network. And in doing so, they've begun to sketch out, as Bishop Rachel has just shared with us, the beginnings of an effective programme of work that can meet those needs and circumstances in the months ahead. And boy, do we need such a programme for people who are facing a full-on triple threat to their living standards, both within the county and across the country, through higher energy bills, of course, as well as higher food costs and higher rents. Now, while the new Prime Minister and her Chancellor will of course need to lead from the front by taking direct action to bring down inflation and mitigate its worst effects, each of us at a local, regional and national level will need to take our own responses onto, I believe, a new and totally different level if our country's overall strategy is to be successful in shielding people from destitution and those broader injustices around food insecurity. Now, to state the obvious, food banks will continue to have a necessary role to fulfil as a last line of defence of sorts in providing temporary relief to those of our fellow citizens who are in total crisis and who have fallen through the cracks in statutory services. And it is this role that food banks have always said to us at Feeding Britain that they wish to fulfil, as opposed to supplying ever larger quantities of food to ever growing numbers of people whose low incomes, bad fortune, or both constantly leave them unable to buy their own food and place them at risk of becoming dependent on food parcels in the longer term, or simply not eating at all. Now, the role that a growing number of churches and other community-led organisations are taking on in partnership with Feeding Britain is to minimise the size of that group and in the process ease at least some of the strain on the food banks and other forms of crisis provision, which form that last line of defence against hunger and food insecurity. But they're doing so by working with us to establish affordable food clubs like pantries and social supermarkets, which function as ethical institutions that harmonise those individual needs and self-interest with the common good. People sign up to each of those clubs in return for a weekly contribution, anywhere between £3 and £8, which entitles them to a range of fresh, chilled, frozen and long life goods, often with a combined value of between £10 and £20 that they can choose for themselves. Increasingly, the 170 or so clubs across our network are now building on this core offer with on-site programmes of meals and activities for children and their families during school holidays, social gatherings for pensioners, as well as immediate access to services like welfare rights, debt advice, housing officers and credit union accounts, which can maximise people's incomes and make life that much more manageable while they simultaneously save money on food, all playing a role in a cash-first approach, which gets more money into people's pockets. Now, we've been privileged at Feeding Britain to support the early development of these services so far within the Forest and in Cheltenham, and that is an open offer from us to community-led schemes of this nature across the whole county, whether you're starting from scratch or whether you want to take an existing scheme onto its next level. A second open offer from us is to take what you're picking up from the communities that you serve around the specific drivers of need, and then translate that knowledge into workable policy prescriptions, which are then taken into Parliament by the MPs and peers who support our work, and are backed up by the high quality research that's published by our academic advisory group. But one recent example of this, involving the take-up of the Healthy Start scheme, has seen Bishop Rachel lead the campaign in the House of Lords in seeking to secure the resumption of monthly data publishing on take-up, to resolve issues that have arisen around the transition from vouchers to prepaid cards, and to explore the introduction of an automatic registration scheme as a means of securing full take-up. Over in the Commons, MPs have raised these same issues on our behalf in a debate last week. They will be scoping with us next week a piece of backbench legislation on this matter. And all of that parliamentary work on Healthy Start has been underpinned by evidence from the front line of the Feeding Britain network, i.e. you, as well as the research we've published through our academic advisory group in the British Medical Journal. In a similar vein, our chair, Baroness Boycott, who sits alongside Bishop Rachel in the House of Lords, tabled an amendment to the schools bill just before the summer recess, which sought to introduce automatic registration, but this time for free school meals. And the minister in charge of the bill responded positively to this suggestion, and as long as they survive the current ministerial reshuffle, we'll be meeting them shortly to run through the mechanics of that possible reform. And then once Parliament returns fully next week, 2 motions will be tabled on our behalf in the House of Commons, proposing another significant lowering of the rate of deductions that are taken from universal credit payments, and a much swifter than planned introduction of a national rollout of a yellow card warning system in place of the rigid and immediate system of benefit sanctions. And that links into our third open offer to you, the constant exchange and sharing of knowledge and practice from region to region within the Feeding Britain network. For while we're continuing to pursue those national reforms that I just mentioned, already there are a handful of innovative local authorities using the tools at their disposal to introduce automatic registration schemes of sorts. In this week's network bulletin, for example, we shared one model from Sheffield City Council, and next week we'll be sharing another, albeit similar one from Feeding Coventry. And there was also Feeding Liverpool's strategy for maximising take-up of Healthy Start within the city. Moreover, we have 3 upcoming network webinars to share good practice, which has emerged on 3 fronts through our 56 local and regional partnerships. First, the transition that a number of food banks have made to become affordable food clubs. Second, the addition of cookery sessions to food clubs. And thirdly, the links that are being forged between local growers and food clubs. And details of those sessions will follow soon in your upcoming network bulletins. And so, as Feeding Gloucestershire embarks on its programme of work, you can count on us at Feeding Britain for support on those 3 fronts: the direct support for practical action across the county to prevent food insecurity as well as respond to it, swiftly raising and addressing the drivers of the need for that action through bills, questions and debates in both Houses of Parliament, and offering a forum for ideas, knowledge and good practice to be both shared and received across the country. And so it's in that spirit, I'm really looking forward to listening and learning from you throughout the remainder of this afternoon's meeting, and thank you very much for having me along.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Sarah Avery. I head up what is Feed Cheltenham in response to the COVID pandemic, been going about 2.5 years. Yes, I am in a car because I'm also in Milton Keynes on a theology course, so do bear with me. My job is to talk about the role of the community sector and how the community is important to this role within Feeding Gloucestershire. And I just want to start by saying I'm a big advocate of the voluntary sector, partly because I manage a charity within that. And I think it's, if you're sitting there thinking, you know, how does this work? How do I join up with this? actually, I think what we do on the ground as voluntary organisations is ever so really important. We're the ones that know the voice of the people. We're the ones that work on the ground. We're the one that do the work on a really day-to-day basis. So I think what I want to say here is that this is a big organisation that goes county-wide. Now, we might be small cogs in our little part of the county, working where we work with, but I think this gives us an opportunity to kind of have a point where we can come together and share ideas and share resources. And it's not about being in competition with each other. It's not about saying, oh, what we do in Cheltenham is better than what goes on in the forest, or what goes on in another part of the county. You should be doing this. Because I think as voluntary sector and community organisations, we very much know our patch. And I think what it's really important to have is a network of support where we can share ideas. And this is something we're very on top of in Cheltenham. So I think I found it helpful from my point of view to be able to say, actually, if you're doing that over there, we could do that over here. Or if we're doing that over here, we can share that idea and share those resources with you over there. There's no point in any of us reinventing the wheel. So I think this does give us a really good point and a really good place where we can come together and share resources, share the ideas, and share those kind of frustrations as well, and perhaps kind of talk about funding or different ways that we do things to make things sustainable. As to say, it's kind of using a joint voice to make a point. There's lots of different voices in the room. You know, I very much work with families. Other people might very much work with people of an older generation. So it could be that we can just share and be able to kind of learn about each other's and talk to each other. So that's kind of where I'm coming from it, from a point of view of that. You know, I kind of spend a lot of time focusing on Cheltenham, but actually there'll probably be a lot of people on this call that are focusing in different parts of the county, and how that's really important. No one here is saying that they're better or they're doing it in a different way. We want to learn from each other. So I think having that kind of place where we can come together just works on the principle of we can do so much more together than we ever can apart. So it's kind of me done, Rachel. So yeah, if anyone wants to get in touch with me and kind of learn from some of the stuff we've done in Cheltenham, we're all about sharing, So I say my details are around, so just let me know. So thank you for having me.
Brilliant, thank you so much. A real good example of something on the ground, that real pragmatic of how it's going. And the key part, as Deb said earlier, of the network is how we do share things. Don't try and compete, but yeah, work out who's doing what and how we can connect. Coming now to Emma Keating-Clark Stroud. So Emma, do introduce yourself and share with us for 5 minutes.
Thank you. It's lovely to see everyone. It's great to see so much interest. I'm talking about what's happening in Stroud, but I'm just one very small voice in amongst a lot of people who are very, very busy on the ground, looking at the whole spectrum of food work. I joined Feeding Gloucestershire because for me, that national good practice and the opportunity to join in the national influence of what's happening, and also to learn from my colleagues across the county and to have good practice has been really valuable already. Even though we haven't officially been launched, through our links with the Trussell Trust through Feeding Gloucestershire in Stroud, we were able to get a brilliant quality Worrying About Money leaflet, which is a national leaflet, a great bit of practice. And because that's already up and running, all we had to do was pay for it. And we were able to get a Stroud one, and thousands of leaflets were able to come into Stroud a few months ago. So that to me was just like a really simple thing that if I had been sat in my little bubble in Stroud, I would never have had access to that sort of thing. What we're trying to do in Stroud is really look at that affordable food network model, the kind of thing that Sarah's just been talking about. After COVID, we put a lot of effort into improving the support there is out there for community groups. So we've now grown the number of community hubs who have got paid staff, and have got better infrastructure behind them. It's a developing project. There are still lots of tiny little groups who are, you know, running on a shoestring, very hardworking volunteers. And my main job feels like I'm constantly championing, please put money their way, put money into the local groups, because they're the ones who are preventing people from being unwell and are keeping people out of the NHS. I'm always banging onto the NHS about that. But the thing that I'm hoping that our Feeding Gloucestershire movement will do in Stroud is to really pull together all those people that need to be in a network, so that the community hubs who are offering food right now, affordable food right now, are not having to drive around the county picking up supermarket waste, or, you know, using just fair shares, and, you know, everyone doing their own thing in a very uncoordinated way, a very inefficient way for those volunteers, so that we can actually have a proper coordinated approach to making sure that people have affordable food. We're never going to be able to replace the food bank, and you know, Amanda will be the first person to tell you the demand on the food bank right now is appalling, but the step from food bank to supermarket food is too great, and we need something in the middle. So for me, working out a really good, sustainable, properly supported, properly funded, affordable food network is something, it might be a very difficult thing to achieve, but we need to work on it together. So that for me is what being part of Feeding Stroud is about.
Thank you. I mean, we've had that language of connection, and now, you know, you've really talked about that coordination word, which is really important. So there's someone, I think might have been Deb's earlier, no point reinventing the wheel, but actually if everyone's doing their own thing, but we're not working in an efficient way with one another, I think, you know, it's about how we do things that are sustainable, which is really helpful.